The following Truth Barista podcast is a High Beam Ministry production.
Shots fired, shots fired.
The attack, a form of revenge by an angry young man, one who was hell-bent on blaming women for his own personal loneliness.
The girls are not sexually attracted to me. There's a major problem with that. A major problem. That's a problem that I intend to rectify.
More and more male hatred against women is rising up through the hidden crevices of online forums and entering real life. Allegedly the inspiration behind the mass attacks in Santa Barbara, Toronto, and Tallahassee, Florida.
Welcome to the Ersatz Coffee Shop. This is Jay, your Truth Barista, and I'm serving up a steamy cup of God's truth for the average Joe. You can catch me and this podcast on my websites, truthbarista.com, all one word, truthbarista.com, and highbeamministry.com. That's HIGHBEAM ministry.com, as in car high beam. We're shining the light of God's truth on the road ahead.
Truth Barista, we're back in the anointed booth again. And one of the things I have noticed, can I share an observation?
Yes, you may share, sir.
I think when we get here, more chances than not, we're talking about women. Now, we're not talking about women, sexually. We're just talking about women in general. We've talked a lot in our Bible studies about women, their roles and who they are, how God's created them. And why is that?
Well, one of the concerns that I know you and I both share is you and I believe that God has asked and actually called men and women into ministry, into his service. You and I have been around this a lot. Genesis 1:28, God looks at the couple, Adam and Eve, the man and the woman, standing shoulder to shoulder in front of him. And he says, okay, everything's all set up. Everything's all ready to go. Now here's your job description. Subdue the creation and its creatures, and then I want you to manage them. It's this co-commissioning of this couple. And yet, once you get to the fall, you see the man placed over the woman as, in a sense, a governor, because she kind of stepped out of line and initiated things she shouldn't have. And he's just as guilty because he went along with it. So I'm not casting aspersions. But because of that fallen nature setup, it seems through the Bible narrative and then subsequent human history that men really exploit women and women struggle against men. And it's this big struggle that you and I are examining over and over again. Where do women fit in ministry? What is the woman's role in the church? What is the value of women in the place of Christianity? What does God want to do with men and women? And how is he going to bring this original design back together? And we've been accused. Here in the Ersatz Coffee Shop, we have a lot of lovely liberal friends that come over from Big Brain University, as you know, and they say, why is the Bible such a patriarchal book? It seems so patriarchal to me. Is God a misogynist? And all this, you've heard this stuff, right?
Absolutely. By the way, what's a misogynist?
That is a person who has a hatred or disdain for women or girls. So really, when you're talking about the God who created women, and you're saying that God hates the creation he created or holds them in disdain, wow, that is really a gross untruth. It's a lie.
It is a lie. We have a mutual friend, and I don't think either one of us agree with this, but it's an interesting thought. He said to me one day, and he's a minister, a clergy, he said he thinks that the 10 Commandments were primarily written for men because of their predatory nature. And of course, I don't know if that's true, but it is an interesting thought, isn't it? Because women back in the day were chattel. They really didn't have a lot of rights back in the day, so maybe the adultery and all those 10 Commandments there, really were applying to us, because men generally, and you said it earlier, Truth Barista, we're sort of the problem. We're predators. We take advantage of women.
Number one, the point of the commandments in a covenant is to provide boundaries for behavior. You got that?
Got it.
So when God draws a person into covenant with them, male or female, he says, these are the parameters within which I want you to live. So yeah, it is true the 10 Commandments are parameters for men. They're also equally parameters for women. Either way. I mean, it's like, thou shalt not commit adultery. You can't say that's just men, because I know women who have committed adultery. Okay, so his argument is, I would either say by accident or on purpose, one-sided.
It
probably comes from an agenda or a bias.
Well, I think he was basically stating that men are the problem sexually most of the time. I mean, I read a statistic, Truth Barista, the other day that said 96% of child molestations are done by males. And you go, wow. And, most rape cases, it's not too often a woman rapes a man, but it's the other way around most often. So we are more or less the aggressors sexually toward women.
And I agree with that. The stats agree with that. Where I think that comes from is it really, again, goes back to the Genesis thing. God gave the couple the drive, the mandate to subdue, which means to bring under control, and to rule, which means to manage. So they were to do this shoulder to shoulder. When you get to the fall, the woman is placed under the governance of the man in a kind of poetic justice for her, quote unquote, initially getting out of line by listening to the serpent rather than adhering to God. And again, I want to say this doesn't excuse the man. He is equally at fault. However, as you and I have talked in the past, when you take this bring under control and manage drive within human beings, and you separate it from the boundaries, the governor of God's laws and commands and his moral standard, then it's driven by desire. And it actually morphs from subdue and rule to conquer and dominate. And what is sexual attack? What is rape but a conquering and dominating of another person? And it just so happens that in men, the sex drive is very strong, and just based on experience and in counseling sessions, and others can go into this in greater detail if they want, but it seems men are more driven in this desire. I mean, let's face it, a lot of pornography. Men are the greater consumers of pornography as opposed to women. That doesn't mean women don't consume pornography, but men have a greater consumption of it. Ergo, therefore, men have this greater desire. Cut loose from God's boundaries, you have greater sexual assaults, seductions, et cetera, et cetera.
Well, because it isn't managed, but, that desire was created by God, not by man. I think God put it in males to procreate, right? And so someone's got to start the procreation process, and so I think the male begins that way.
You're on track, and you're bringing up the second half of this. This procreation thing precedes subdue and rule in Genesis. God looked at the couple and said, what? Be fruitful and multiply. So in the beginning, the couple had the responsibility to reproduce and to rule, so to speak. The picture is this. God created an untamed world, and you and I have talked about this before. He created this untamed world. He created man. He creates this habitation for man called Eden. He puts the man in Eden, creates a woman to be his partner, and then he says to them, okay, here's the deal. I want you to bring this untamed world under control and then manage it. That's the subdue and rule thing. And by the way, as you expand the boundaries of Eden, as it's extending over all the earth, that's God's plan, is to Edenize the earth. You're going to have to fill it with more people. And so here's your reproductive drive. So you're right. Males have a reproductive drive. So do women. And what I'm getting at is when that drive, whether it's to subdue and rule or it's to reproduce, cut loose from God's moral boundaries and his, so to speak, his governor on that engine, these drives go into overdrive, and then they burst the boundaries, and then you have all sorts of sin and tragedy and trauma, and you have the state of the world that we're in where you look what's going on in the Middle East. In radical Islam, you see women being bought and sold. And by the way, you also see sex trafficking here in the West.
That's correct.
Not just limited to Islam.
No.
It is man's out of control drive to literally use the reproductive process to exert control over other people. It is insidious and it is demonic.
You're right. Human trafficking now is the modern day slavery. That's just another form of it, right? Culture has something to say to us about this, Truth Barista. At least I have found that the pressures of culture for us to conform to this ideology that we're all the same is their way of dealing with some of this stuff. I mean, men are looking like women and women are looking like men. In fact, I was in a store the other day and there was a person in front of me and I had had shorts on and a kind of a light blouse, and the ponytail, it was a bun, not a ponytail, at the top of their head. And I thought, wow, that's a woman. Well, I turned the corner and the guy had a beard. And I go, whoa. I mean, you couldn't tell the difference, from the backside, it was a man or a woman. But that's the cultural norm today. There is no distinction. We're all one size fits all. That's just a lie, Truth Barista, isn't it?
Yes. And you hit it. It's a lie, meaning it's not the truth. Where does this come from? We live in a postmodern society, meaning there's a philosophy at work that says there is no objective truth. There is no way to know objective truth. When you kick away a standard, you can set any standard that you want. And again, this gets back to, if I kick away God's standards, then I can create my own standards based on my own desires, my own wanna-dos, my own wannabes, and suddenly, if I feel like I'm a woman in a man's body, then obviously I am. However, the basic biology of a body says XX chromosome versus XY chromosome. And please don't give me well, what about XXX? Those are great anomalies. Those are aberrations, and they cannot be used as any sort of standard. It is a statistical anomaly, okay? But the objective truth is XXXY. So it's not in the body, it's in the mind. So once you cut loose from objective truth, then the mind begins to go off center and can actually deny reality and determine a reality that doesn't exist. And we call that a psychosis. Paul said this very strongly in Romans 1. He says, once you willingly and purposely push away and deny and reject the truth of God, which he is the most objective truth there is. Once you push away that objective truth, God says, fine, I'll give you over to madness, so to speak, to kind of, summarize it. You can go mad if you want, and you can live in a world that is, psychotic and cut loose. And then he goes on to describe what that world looks like in Romans. And it's not just homosexuality. It is a plethora of horrible things and things that produce trauma in people's lives, etc. So what we're really trying to do when we talk about this topic of women is to try to bring it back into line with God's truth, to clarify how God feels about women. I mean, he loves women. Why? Because he made so darn many of them. I'm just saying,
Well,
and
yes,
again,
he did.
God can't be a misogynist because that is totally against the truth that God is love. God does not, in a sense, hate his creation. He loves his creation. So how can God hate or disdain that which he loves? And he keeps creating lovingly because that's what he loves. I know it's kind of a circular argument there anyway, but you get what I'm saying.
Well, our theme today, which is God's love for women, it encompasses a lot of things, and we're just covering a part of it today, and we've got a lot more to go. In fact, that accusation that the Big Brain University students came in here with the other day that's saying that, God is a misogynist and all that, we're going to hit that head on, but we got to get some coffee first, wouldn't you agree?
Amen, brother.
We are presenting God's truth for our day. You're listening to The Truth Barista, a production of highbeamministry.com.
The Truth Barista podcast, set in the imaginary Ersatz coffee shop next to Big Brain University. The Truth Barista podcast tackles a plethora of scintillating topics. We don't shy away from controversy, whether it's current cultural issues, questions about Bible verses, or even just some banter to encourage you. Jay the Truth Barista and Amazing Larry brew up highly caffeinated talk times.
We are two wild and crazy guys.
Grab a cup of joe, plop yourself down in the booth next to us, and get ready to think. The Truth Barista podcast, a production of High Beam Ministry, highbeamministry.com.
Okay, Truth Barista, just before we took our coffee break, we were talking about the question, is God a misogynist? Does he really hate women, as some of the people in the cultural society assert? Is that true?
Absolutely not. Again, God created man and woman as co-equal partners. If he hates women, he hates men as well. And we are his representatives. He loves us. God is love. In fact, he loves men and women so much, it says in John, that he gave his only son, his unique one and only son, to die for all of us, both sexes. Even if you're confused about your sex, he died for you. He loves you regardless of where you're at. The scripture says, while we were yet dead in sin, he gave himself. He died for us. Okay, so let's just eliminate that aspect of it, okay?
Okay.
As I said, the fall created this patriarchy seed, okay? The male over the female under the governance and oversight of the male. And as we talked about just now, women are not the same as men biologically, but they both, and here's the interesting thing, they both have strengths and weaknesses that complement each other and offset the weakness and strength of the other in generally speaking.
Illustrate that, because I think you're right, but paint a picture.
Okay, if you were to go to many of the Christian counseling sites that talk about relationships between men and women and how men appear to be wired and how women appear to be wired, women are much more nurturing. They are much more emotional. And no, I'm not going to go into the stupid stereotypes on this. I'm just saying this is what happens. We make jokes about things that have an element of truth in them, right? Well, I saw this great picture of a man and a woman. It's a meme that goes around Facebook. And the man and the woman are lying in bed and they're in their jammies. And the woman is kind of turned away from the man and she's looking over her shoulder at him with kind of a stern look and a squinted eye. And she's saying, I bet that he's thinking about other women. And the man is turned away from her with kind of a scowl on his face. And he's saying, why would Xbox release this in a format that just doesn't jive with the game? You know,
Perfect.
We laugh because she's dealing with this on an emotional thing and he's dealing with it more on an intellectual male achievement. Let's go hunt down the prize kind of an attitude. I've got a goal. Here's a classic case. And I love this. I laugh about this all the time when my wife and I go to Target. She wants to go shopping. I want to buy something. There is a difference, right?
Well, some people call that hunting. You know,
Yes,
a man wants
hunt,
to hunt.
She shops.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And we laugh about this because we know, right? And I know you and I are laughing about it. The people in the next booth, I can see them snickering over this. When my wife goes to Target, God bless her, she goes through all the racks and looks for the deals and, oh, there's this nice thing. I am on my phone because I am just not interested. I love my wife, but I'm sorry, it just drives me nuts sometimes. Well, then I see something in the tech department.
Oh, of course.
And I want to have that thing.
Yes.
So I stalk it, I find it, I apprehend it, and I bring it back in triumph to my wife. Look, I have found the earbuds I have been hunting for on my tech safari for decades.
Oh, perfect.
And Jean says, okay. And then she goes shopping. Yes, I'm blowing that out of proportion for humor's sake. And then there is no way I'm degrading my wife. I'm picking on myself more than anything. But that is a significant difference between men and women. Men have a tendency to be more outwardly focused. Women are more inwardly focused. Men are more procurement, hunting, goal-centered. You see women who are more home-centered, more emotionally centered, nurturing of the family. This is why you have a lot of men demonstrating a type A personality in the business world. You don't see many women in a type A personality in the business world as you do see men. You do see men at home as house husbands, but you have a lot of women who would rather stay at home as house women and housewives, nurturing and maintaining and managing a home, which, by the way, is no easy task because I've done it.
Yes.
Okay. I'm doing it right now. So I don't want to hear any griping from anybody.
Well, let me ask you this, Truth Barista, because I think when culture kind of comes at us with their ideas of, you know, we're the same and so forth, doesn't the Bible in the Old Testament or the Hebrew Scriptures, it protects women and it does differentiate between male and females clearly. It never puts them into one basket. And the same thing with the New Testament, because Paul is writing to the Ephesian church and he said, you know, husbands, love your wives. Now that's an interesting piece to unpack sometime. And wives, honor your husband. So love and honor is a part of a relationship. Now I realize that that's in a marriage, but it still has something to do with the very nature of the creation, I think. What's your thought?
Absolutely. When you look at Ephesians 5, you are looking at the original design God wanted. Now, I preached about this. I shared it at my daughter's wedding because it was so much fun, because it says, wives, submit to your husbands. And I did that because she specifically didn't want me to use that verse. So I said, wives, submit to your husband. And, Brian, her 6'7" husband, and Rachel is like 5'9", he's towering over her. He just turns to her with this smirk on his face. And I knew there was going to be trouble. But anyway, I pressed on. And the second point, it says, wives, submit to your husbands, but husbands, love your wives. If a man is loving and caring and nurturing of his wife, she has no problem working with him. And this does not mean submissive doormat. This means submissive cooperative. You are operating together. But the third point is the most important point. You have to back up a verse before that, or a couple verses before that, where Paul is talking to the entire community. And what does he say? To the men and women of the community, he says, submit yourselves one to another. Mic drop at that point. Okay, that's just the way it is. We are to submit to each other and work shoulder to shoulder. See, there's the original plan. In the new covenant, under the work of the Holy Spirit and the regenerating power, the changing power of Jesus, we are being changed back to the original design. That's the point. And we have the power to do so. So really, the church should be setting the standard of men and women in mutual cooperation, submitting to one another, loving one another, and fulfilling God's work one another.
Truth Barista, we could go on about this. And of course, I don't know if we're going to have time in today's study to really get into these questions you have. So why don't we just kind of end this conversation out today just on a summary that you would put together here about male and female relationships, and then we'll get into the misogynistic part of the questions that our big brain university students have raised next time.
Right. Okay. And I'm going to give you a teaser because we're going to talk about the original pattern here quick once again, and then we're going to show you how bad it went just shortly after that. Okay. So really, God created man and woman as co-equal partners working shoulder to shoulder. At the fall, it created a patriarchy, or the seeds of a patriarchy. Obviously divorced from God's boundaries. It went really awry. And the entire work of the Bible is bringing it back to the original pattern, and you see that in Jesus. His transforming work has created a people of God, which is the seed for the re-Edenizing of the world. How's that for an entire Bible summary?
Wow, Edenizing. I've never heard that term before. Edenizing. Huh.
Thank you very much. I coined that one myself.
So give us one last thought that we can take away as a lead-in to talk about the misogynistic God that people are saying that he is.
The Bible is clear. God is not misogynistic. The Bible is not misogynistic. Christianity is certainly not misogynistic. However, some Christians are. I think they need to learn the truth behind what God says so that we can align our lives with how God wants us to live according to his truth.
The first step in anything is knowing the truth. Knowing the truth about God is what we do in every podcast here on the Truth Barista. The next step is yours and what you do about it. We are the Truth Barista, a production of highbeamministry.com.
This is Jay, your Truth Barista. Thanks for listening to the Truth Barista podcast. The best way to find out when a new podcast drops is through RSS feed. Go to our website, look for the RSS button, press it, and then enter your email. You'll be notified when a new podcast drops. Thanks for listening.